Hi, I want to say a few things about suicide here in the context of the collective unconscious, especially regarding children and drawing from my own experience. Maybe someone can extrapolate something useful from this. This has nothing to do with any afterlife mythos or reincarnation theory, since there's quite an element of mystery there, and despite my brushes with death, I've never had an official near-death experience, so I can't really speak to that. But anyway, these kinds of thought forms have been a recurring theme that I've grown so familiar with to the point where it's basically become a creative muse in and of itself. And that's one critical point that I want to make. I like to acknowledge the sickness of our species in a rather straightforward way, but the whole point is that it can be transformed within oneself. While there's often an attractive element of spite to suicide, there's also the tendency to mistake the insanity of the world and all its manifestations for who you are as a child. But suicidal ideation can be overcome through the act of creating or cultivating something for its own sake. In psychiatric wards, they call this occupational therapy. So maybe the first step involves being able to find the humor in a culture full of euphemisms like this. Most people are deeply under the influence and possession of someone else's intentions, such as with the preoccupation with phones, video games, porn, mindless day jobs, and public schooling, to name a few, along with whatever else factors into the hijacking of the individual and colonization of mind and body. Imagination and creativity, along with the physical grounding and cultivating of a more tactile relationship with your environment, with nature, and the materials with which you choose to create, whatever it is, this is the process of sublimation. It's also how one can maintain a sense of equilibrium in the center of this schizophrenic shit show of post-human society. And Mother Nature has always been the long-term cure for the short-term disease of such things. Even if this construct were to remain forever unstable, then so be it. One can create for the sake of creation. At any given point throughout history, there's always been the illusions of the times to contend with, and if there is the will, there's a way to navigate through them, otherwise we would not be here. But to consider this from a child's perspective, or that of a young person, occasionally a simple breakup or bullying situation may be all the incentive they need to take themselves out, because generally speaking, the spectrum of experience they have to draw from is so limited, and the alleged adults in the room are too busy living inside their little black mirror toys or just fucking off in general. Children are typically left on their own to somehow make sense of this shit in order to navigate their way through this life. But they do have the capacity to learn and grow in ways that adults in their conditioned, often self-medicated state can't seem to fathom. The potential capacity for genius that children possess is probably more terrifying to adults than anything. It could be argued that this point of terror is lurking somewhere at the motivational core of all crimes against children. The desire to control what you fear is not necessarily limited to the alleged ruling puppet class, as it were. For the sake of cultural context, another interesting element in the overarching narratives of our time is the erasure of the individual in order to make everything about one big homogeneous formulaic group identity, and the peer pressure to conform to an endless laundry list of politically correct rules and regulations that form the comfortable straitjacket of collectivist narcissism, the fake-ass rebellion that is modern conformity. Children probably can't articulate it, but they can feel it breathing down their necks like some pedophile politician, along with constant affirmations that the world's about to end and they have no future. This is what they're being told on a regular basis, amongst other things. The transference of learned helplessness, along with existential guilt, onto children is what you might call a crime against nature, committed by those who are basically already dead. Traditionally, the abuser wants you to internalize what they project onto you. And one lesson to take away from this is that there is a tendency amongst people to cast others in certain roles in order to satisfy the idea of a character they are trying to maintain in their own life. This is overwhelmingly common in relationships. Also, as people are conditioned to see others in terms of demographics, the only way they can fathom individuality is in the context of their own collective solipsistic psychosis. Beyond that, in the limited experience of young people in schools, as far as I remember, the targeting tends to be based on variables that are even more trivial than that. And this sort of thing is practically an unavoidable aspect of the human experience. There will always be people who want you to fail and to cause you to hate yourself and perhaps even to think about them. It's very important to them. One thing you can do is cultivate a sense of humor, because the prejudices of the average person in society are based almost entirely on limited imagination and stunted maturity. You can study your own reactions to such things or interpret it symbolically as if it were a recurring dream. You can look at the situation from a multitude of perspectives and you can have a lot of fun with it. There is literally something to learn from everyone in this life, from petty tyrants and psychic vampires to megalomaniac muppets. There's a virtual bottomless wellspring of inspiration to be discovered across the entire sociopathic spectrum of opinions and assholes. It seems that not too many people know how to interact with each other on a human level anymore, and while it's entirely by design, it does take an individual to step out of the mold. Sometimes suicidal ideation can be based on a misdirected and frustrated desire to do so, because if you were to step out, where the fuck do you go from there? Solitude can be quite unbearable for a lot of people, especially young ones. If they don't know what to do with themselves or haven't given thought to their own creative capacity, or if they've been around people all the time. But if you're at a point where you feel you have absolutely nothing to lose, there's an incredible amount of potential power in this space, whether you understand that or not. More often than not, someone who has something to offer the world doesn't recognize the value of it, but they see a human world full of abuse, deception, and stupidity, and with that can come a sense of being vastly outnumbered and gaslit by a self-negating collective. It's important to understand that the sincerely creative individual is someone who this culture is engineered to trivialize and diminish, because the collective cannot comprehend why anyone on their own would create with no collectivist agenda, or with no one to back them up. When it comes to the collective, there is something referred to as diffusion of responsibility, encrypted in the underpinnings of what you might call self-murder, which is what they seem to be all about. But the decision to evolve is yours. In a socially controlled technotopia, the idea of self-understanding may be virtually non-existent for those who fall for the absolute colonization of mind and body and the bolstering of their self-image, the come down from which would be quite a downward spiral in and of itself. To be yourself with honesty and sincerity, and to follow your own path offers its own unique rite of passage for those who are willing. It's not meant to be easy, but no one gets out of this world alive. So any kind of safety in numbers mythology is going to be pretty damn useless in the final analysis. So the temptation to take oneself out can grow out of some well-founded suspicions about this place, which can metastasize into certain thought forms that amount to nihilism, misanthropy, and bottomless cynicism. And these are understandable psychosomatic responses that one can always find ways to rationalize into their own personal ideology. And it can make sense as a kind of trauma response, but instead of allowing yourself to be completely possessed by the response, or conversely trying to avoid it altogether, consider working with it as a muse in some creative capacity. I won't tell you what that is, but this is the process of sublimation, or overriding thought forms that don't ultimately serve you. Disillusion about the human world and all its endless narcissistic and dissociative gaslighting and sadomasochistic psychopathy. How does one take all of that in and not come to the reasonable conclusion of fuck this place? The collective unconscious is, in many respects, a goddamn sewer. And a child cannot be expected to know what to make of all this, but there's no shortage of self-righteous pigs who want to tell them who they are. Who you are in this world and what you're here to do is a question that you can hold, and the question does not necessitate an immediate answer. To create for the sake of creation, and through focusing on the process itself, it will naturally begin to unfold and evolve on its own as with you. If you can manage to take a step back from your habitual point of view, then you can look at it more forensically. It's a subtle shift to become the calm at the center of the storm, and you don't have to take yourself out to get there. Rites of passage can often seem like virtual deaths, and points of resistance are always instrumental for the cultivation of strength. People respond to rites of passage and psychic resistance in different ways, because we're each having our own unique experience here. But when you choose how to respond, you can embrace it. And at the very least, it's worth considering that the way out may be to simply continue. And I will leave it at that for now. Take care.